Welcome to Productive Joy with Dr. Christy, where fun meets action.
Hi, friends. Welcome to Productive Joy and happy almost New Year. We are here on New Year's Eve and so excited that you've chosen to tune in and get excited about what 2025 has to offer. Today, you are in for an extra special treat, but remember, you won't know about these treats if you don't follow the podcast. It is so important that you subscribe, follow, do that wherever you get your podcasts, because otherwise you won't meet new friends like Professor Pete that we're going to talk about today. So, Professor Pete Alexander is a pretty cool dude. He is a husband. He is a dad of two and about to be a father-in-law. He's an author and a stress relief specialist, and he's an avid hiker who actually does it professionally at the Olympic National Park, which is very cool. He is also a laughter yoga teacher, and he does some improv comedy. Professor Pete, welcome to Productive Joy.
Christy, thank you so much for having me on your wonderful show, and I really appreciate your listeners' time as well.
This is going to be a lot of fun. And that is the whole purpose, right? So we found each other because you thought Productive Joy sounded like a good symbiotic relationship to what it is that you do. But people have a short attention span. So what would you say in 30 seconds or less that would get people excited about the next 30 minutes?
Oh, yeah. What I would say is if you, the listener, have been challenged with stressful situations, obviously just getting through the holidays, there's quick and easy things you can do to take care of yourself because it's so important to focus on your mental and physical health first before you can help anyone else. Because if you think about being, let's say, when you're really sick, do you feel like doing anything other than lying in bed? Probably not. And if all you can do is lie in bed, you're no good to your loved ones, you're no good to your work, you're no good to anything. So take care of your health.
Yeah, and that needs to be like on a billboard somewhere, especially after the holidays, because we do tend to be in a dead run from really October through December. And now here we are creating New Year's resolutions and starting over. But the reality is that we should be doing that all year long. You can't
Right.
pour from an empty cup, right? So you didn't start there, Professor Pete. You got there. You have arrived in this space that you're in, but I want to hear your origin story. How did you start out? Like what propelled you into this space where you're now teaching other people about how to manage their stress? What brought you to this point? You can start
Well,
wherever you want, but we can go way
sure.
back if you want.
Let's go way back because Stress and I have had pretty much a lifelong relationship together. I grew up in a very dysfunctional family. You know, if you were to look at the dictionary on the term dysfunctional family, it would be a picture of my family.
Mm.
My parents had 9 divorces, 7 widowing, 7, I'm sorry, 9 marriages, 7 divorces, and 1 widowing.
Wow.
And that included being married to each other twice, kind of like the Liz Taylor, Richard Burton thing. And here's the craziest part of all. I have one sister. She's 9 years older than I. She's the product of my parents' first marriage, and I'm the product of my parents' second marriage. So my sister and I are 100% blood siblings from 2 different marriages.
Oh my goodness, that's rare, right? Like that's like a fun fact that you use at a party. I have a full sister from 2
Exactly.
different marriages.
Exactly. So needless to say, growing up in that kind of an environment wasn't fun.
Mm-mm.
And what ended up happening is that I took on sort of the hero or the adult before I was an adult role. And because somebody had to.
Yeah.
And what I ended up doing is not dealing with my stress the way that would be more effective. It just I kept on putting it off, putting it off. And so it continued to fester in me as I became an adult and starting my career. And then I was in my mid 40s and I had this perfect storm of stressful activities going on, including my dad dying and needing his affairs to be taken care of because he wasn't, hadn't done any of that. My
Sorry.
mom had major surgery and didn't have physical therapy to recover well, so she needed help. I was running my business at the time with several employees wanting my attention. My kids were small at the time,
Mm.
and oh yeah, and my marriage was heading for a divorce. Yes.
Gosh.
So
Is that
needless to
all?
say, Leah, lots of things going on my shoulders. And all of a sudden, I started losing weight. And in fact, I lost 30 pounds in 30 days. Now, when it first happened, I was thinking, this is fantastic. I'm not dieting and I'm eating whatever I want, and the weight's coming off. It's like, wow, I haven't had this happen since my early 20s. When I was in
Yeah.
my mid 40s. Well, then the 30th pound came off, and I thought, I better have this checked out. And
Yeah.
so I went and got my blood work, and doctor came back and said, congratulations, you have stress-induced diabetes. And
I didn't even know that was a thing.
it is. So what happens is whenever we continuously stress ourselves out, because our bodies are the same bodies we had back in the Stone Age.
Yeah.
But if you think about back in the Stone Age, our stress was very short term. It was fighting off a saber-toothed tiger, a T-Rex, whatever it happens to be, but then nothing else. Well, nowadays, most of our stress is mental.
Mm.
And so we're continuously dropping that adrenaline and cortisol into our bodies when we're stressed. And when we continuously do that, over time, what ends up happening is we get cellular inflammation.
Mm.
And the cellular inflammation is what causes chronic disease. In my case, it was diabetes. Others, it could be cancer, it could be heart disease, etc. And so it's very, very important to mind your stress, because if you don't do it, if you do not take care of your stress over the long term, you're likely to end up with chronic disease that you're going to have to deal with for the rest of your life. And for me, this diabetes now, I got it when I was in my mid 40s. I'm almost 60 now, and it's still something
Wow.
where it's like, oh, I have to deal with it on a daily basis. And there's a lot of things that you just have to deal with that, it was never an issue for me before. And
Hmm.
the crazy thing is, in my family, diabetes is not prevalent. It is something that I had one cousin that had diabetes. That's it.
Wow.
So going back generations. So when I talk about being careful about your stress, I'm talking about it from real world scenario, because I was a workaholic
Yeah.
and I just kept on, work, 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 work. And even when I was diagnosed with the diabetes, here's the crazy thing. I said, okay, fine, just give me whatever drugs. I don't have time to deal with this. So that was back in 2008. And then fast forward 10 years. So I'm continuing to burn the candle at both ends and all of a sudden I end up in the emergency room.
Oh, geez.
And they thought I was having a heart attack, but then they realized I was experiencing a severe case of diabetic ketoacidosis. And for the listeners who don't know what that is, basically my body was eating itself alive because of my stress.
Oh, my goodness.
And I ended up with an extended stay in ICU. And here's the crazy thing. So at that point, I had gone back to corporate. One of my old bosses had talked me into going back, and then he had left, and I was reporting to this micromanager,
Mm.
you know, and there I am in my mid 50s, and I'm thinking I am too old for a micromanager. But anyway, so I was working very hard on this high profile project, and my second day in ICU, I get a text from my micromanager at about 6 a.m. saying, you have a webinar you need to run at 8 o'clock. What are you going to do about it? Mind you, she knew that I was in the ICU.
Oh, my word.
And so I'm looking at this, and you would think, the sane person would say, well, go climb a tree, basically. But
Right.
what did I do? I
You
started pushing the envelope of my phone 'cause what a surprise, I didn't have my work laptop in the
Right, in the
ICU.
ICU,
Right.
right,
So
right.
I'm sitting there with my phone trying to reschedule this webinar, and so the nurse that was taking care of me at that time, she comes over to me and she takes my blood. When I was admitted to ICU, my blood sugars were so high that the medical grade glucometers could not read them. They just said high.
Oh,
So the lab had to manually determine what my blood sugars were. They were 8 to 10 times higher than normal. So when I was sitting there trying to reschedule this webinar, my blood sugars had come back down. They were still higher than they should be, but they were in reasonable numbers.
yeah.
She goes ahead, she takes my blood sugar, and like a 90-degree angle, it shot straight back up. And she says to me, complete stranger for the most part, she says to me, "You realize that's what put you in this hospital bed in the first place." And that was the epiphany moment I needed. I went, "Oh my gosh, I am trading my health for my career, and that's a really bad trade."
Yeah.
So what I did was I just pondered that for most of the next day in the ICU. I got out a couple days later, and the day after I got out of the ICU, I decided I can't do this anymore. I
No.
resigned and I just started focusing on my own health for the first time in my life. I had always been taking care of others. And what I noticed was not only did as I was starting to practice these different stress relief tools and techniques, not only did my stress go down, my glucose numbers as a diabetic went down, my weight went down, and my energy level went way, way up. It was as if I had discovered the fountain of youth. And the crazy thing is, so if you were to see a picture of me from 2008, so, you know, and now you look at me, other than a little bit more gray hair, I actually look younger today than I did in 2008.
Wow.
That is crazy. That's what stress does to us. It
Yeah.
ages us rapidly.
Well, and you've just said so many things that I think our listeners need to pay attention to. One, there is a fountain of youth out there that is
Mhm.
taking care of yourself, right? Is
Right,
paying attention to our stress levels and unwinding and giving ourselves permission to take a breath and settle down. And then as leaders, I think the biggest lesson I heard is are you seriously still micromanaging your people to the point where they're in a hospital bed and you're like, excuse me,
right.
what are you going to do about this webinar? The podcast is designed for leaders who want to do it differently. And so I want to challenge all of you. If you heard this story, the number one thing that you need to do is make sure that you are not adding stress to the
Mhm.
people that you work with. It doesn't mean that you
Right.
don't still have deadlines and you don't still have expectations and obligations, but how you handle them are just so, so important. And then the other thing that I want to rewind all the way back to is you learned the hard way,
Mhm.
but you recognize that other people could learn from your mistakes and grow into a different way of work. And that's what you do now, correct? Is you help
Correct.
people not end up in a hospital bed in ICU for an extended stay and
Mhm.
instead catch it early, right? So thank you
Correct.
for being willing to help other people and not just keep it to yourself.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, it's interesting because, my former coworkers and my friends, they were saying, "What are you doing? You look so much better." I was still working hard, but with other things. And it was just because I had focused on my health. And it really, it's to me, why I do like these interviews, etc., is think if I can help even one listener to take their health seriously, then that was what made it worth it.
Yeah.
Because really in my opinion, I believe that our 2 greatest assets are our health and time.
Yeah. Oh, I would
And
agree.
so, I don't wanna take those either for granted. And so it's really, really important to say, "You know what? If you think about a great analogy here, is when anyone who's ever flown, you know that there's the flight attendants are going through the safety protocols, and they say, in the event of the cabin pressure change, the masks will come down. Please put the mask on yourself before putting it on a child. Well, the reason is because if you put the mask on the child first, you may not be able to do that because you need to be able to breathe first to be able to help someone else. And so it's so, so critical to be able to think about you have to take care of yourself first. And that's not being, selfish. It is being smart
Yes.
because if you don't take care of your health, no one else can take care of your health.
Right. Right.
So,
You can't pour from an empty cup, right? That's
right.
that's a
That's
phrase that I
absolutely right.
use frequently, and yet we try. And I actually just recently had a friend who decided to step back from a job she loves because she realized she was depleted and she didn't
Mhm.
know how to go halfway, right? So
Yes.
she knew that she could have fewer hours and back off, but the reality was that wasn't going to change the outcome because of the way she tends to do things. So
Mhm.
I think I hear, well, I know I hear knowing yourself, right? And
Right.
recognizing your own personal needs and then doing something about it. Because I know
Correct.
that the knowing doing gap is often a chasm, right? Like I
Yes.
know that I should take care of myself, but am I actually taking care of myself? Not so much. So you actually wrote a book to help
Mhm.
people do this. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so it's called Lighten Your Day, Fast, Easy, and Effective Stress Relief. And basically what I did was when I looked for different ways to try and reduce my stress, I thought, okay, what can I do? What works, what doesn't work, et cetera for it. But what I really noticed was that before I wrote that book, there were lots of books out there about stress relief, but most of them talked about one or two activities. And the reality is, for those of us who are go, go, go type A personalities, we may not have the time to read a 300-page book about meditation or yoga, etc. What the reality is we're about to go into a challenging meeting, whether it's with an employee, a boss, a customer, whatever it happens to be, and we have 5 minutes to try and calm ourselves. What can we do in those 5 minutes or less? And so that's what I decided to do with the book. And so the book has roughly 120 different activities in it. Easily 95% of them are 5 minutes or less.
That's so
So
smart.
it is. And here's the great thing about it. So, I've had people who said, "Well, I tried this one, it didn't really work for me." And I said, "Yeah, that one doesn't work, but guess what? You only spent a couple of minutes doing it, big
Yeah.
deal. Next time, try a different one." The key is if you can find a couple different activities that only take a few minutes and they work for you, you run with those.
Yeah.
So you just do them over and over again. Because the thing is about us as our humans, we need to make it a habit.
Yeah.
And so, but a habit takes anywhere, depending on the research, says anywhere from 23 to 60 days. So we have to do it daily
Mhm.
to get it to be a habit. But once it's a habit, now all of a sudden it's just, second nature to us.
Right, we don't
So,
have to process and think about it, and we can just go at it, and make a big, big difference. I love that you gave such variety, and I
mhm,
know you had to have studied lots of different ways in order to get there. Now you have your doctorate. What is your
I do.
doctorate in?
It's actually in marketing. So, so my my PhD actually stands for piled high and deep.
Okay, so in marketing, you are quite the expert. However, you have done a lot of studying in this
I
whole
have.
stress space. And what I think that says about you is that you're a lifelong learner
Mhm.
who recognized that you wanted to keep getting better and growing. And that may be why you choose Professor Pete over Dr. Alexander, right?
Right.
And I think that there's so much power in recognizing that we don't arrive. Right? Like you said, you're almost 60. And so in those years, you've learned some things, but you're not going to stop learning when you turn
No.
61. You are going to continue to grow and change and really give people the tools that they need in their tool belt to be great. I get
Right.
frustrated when people say, "Oh, well, I'm too old for that," or I can't do that now. Why? Who
Mhm.
said? Whose age is just a number. So
Exactly.
why are we stopping ourselves from growing into who we're supposed to be? I think that's pretty telling of your life is that you didn't want to ever arrive. That's very cool.
That's a good way to put it, and it really is a lot of times it's a person's inner critic as well,
Huh?
because, our inner critic is basically our conscious mind, and it basically is trying to protect us. "Oh, you can't do that because you might fail." And the reality is, I you know, anytime we try something new or we push ourselves a little farther than we've gone before, well, inevitably, we're gonna run into some speed bumps,
Yeah.
and because we've never been there before, we've never pushed
Right.
ourselves that far. That's not failure.
Mm-mm.
That's basically, I like to refer to it as the universe telling us, "You need to try something else."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that it's just feedback that you're getting, and the other thing that I always try and remind people is, when you're fearful about something, because again, you don't know if you can do it. If I push myself, will I hurt myself or will I fail? Will I be embarrassed? Blah, 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 blah. Well, I like to look at fear as a four-letter acronym, and
Okay.
that acronym stands for fictional evidence appearing real.
Oh, I like it.
Fictional
Fictional
evidence
evidence.
confirms appearing real.
Uh-huh.
And so if you think about it, when we start going, "Oh, I can't do this because blah, 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 blah." Well, how do you know? Is you're putting these things that you don't know until you try.
Right.
So
Right.
try, and that's the thing, and it's amazing how if you can focus on your health and time and really make sure your health is in order, you're gonna find that you're gonna have energy to wanna try new things.
I love it. Well, and this today is New Year's Eve, and people set New Year's resolutions every year, and sometimes we keep them and sometimes we don't. But I appreciate the fictional evidence appearing real because we have a fear of failure, and so we
Yep.
just don't try, right? Like we're like, I would love to lose 20 pounds this year, but I'm afraid that I won't, so I'm not going to. Or I would love to learn a new skill or how to play an instrument. I have a friend who recently, well, actually, I guess it's been a couple years ago now, but every month she tried something new for a year. That was her New Year's resolution. She learned how
Mhm.
to play an instrument. She cooked a cake from scratch. She joined a
Mhm.
gym, right? Like she did
Mhm.
all kinds of things because she pushed past that fictional idea or evidence that she couldn't. And I think there is something to be said for that for sure. So if you are listening right now and you are thinking about your New Year's resolutions, think about the pathway that's going to get you there instead of the goal itself and recognize that it's not going to be a smooth trip, but it's definitely going to be worth it, right?
It absolutely, and one thing that I would highly recommend, and what I can do is I can give you a link to it. One of the game changer things that I learned many years ago, but it became so paramount to me after I lost my health, was clearly understanding what my top personal values are.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean by the top personal values is the ones that are, non-negotiable. I absolutely have to have these. And the reason why it's so important to know those is because when we're inundated with whether it's career, personal, professional, whatever it happens to be, challenges that we were faced, if we are very clear on what is most important to us, then we can look at those challenges and say, okay, is this something worth stressing about or
Right.
not?
Right.
Because, there a lot of stuff that we end up getting stressed about are what I would call nits, things that really are not that important, or are things that if you were to ask yourself, will this matter 5 days, 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years from now? Probably won't.
Right.
So that's where it's really important. So the doing personal values and identifying, let's say your top five,
Mm-hmm.
It's literally an exercise that takes 10, 15 minutes tops. As long as when you're doing it, you have no distractions. You have to make sure it's a time when, you're not going to get a phone call. So you turn your phone off. You're not going to get a ping on your computer. You're not going to get somebody knocking on your office door. You're not going to have a kid running in or a pet, anything like that. It has to be 100% focused because if you want to get the most out of that exercise, it takes 15 minutes of,
Focus.
total
Well, and
focus.
okay, so listeners, today is a great day to do exactly that. Before you set
Mhm.
any resolutions, before you decide I'm going to look different in 2025, why don't you take a minute to think about what you want to look like, period?
Uh-huh.
Set those personal values. I heard top 5. I think that that's a good amount, and do so without distractions because we are in a constant state of distraction. And if you just take away the noise, sometimes you can actually hear pretty clearly what you're supposed to be doing. Which leads me to my favorite question, because this question, I actually just reviewed it last week and went over all of my different guests and what they said about productive joy. But I love hearing what people would say if I asked you to describe productive joy. So, Professor Pete, if you had to describe productive joy, what would that be for you?
For me, it would be doing something, whether it's something I did for the day, whether it was something I did as a career, whether it's something that I did for someone else, that I actually made a positive difference in that person or that person's life. That is what I think is productive joy because I made a positive difference.
Well, and you're doing that with your students, you're doing that with your work that you do with your book. You're giving people a different outlook on things and a positive influence. Now, it's still up to them to use it, right? I
Right.
I have learned a long time ago that I can't make somebody do anything. I can only influence, right? Our sphere of control is this teeny tiny little hole, but our sphere of influence is unstoppable. And I think we as humans want to control, kind of like your micromanager boss, right? She
Right.
wanted to
Right.
control you and everything you did.
Right.
And you see how successful that was. Instead, we
Yeah.
have to influence. We have to convince people that it's what they need and want and not necessarily what we do. I love that definition. Something that you did that actually had made a positive difference for someone else. And you're doing that for our listeners today. So I want to say a
Thank
huge
you.
thank you for that. And if you're not watching this, I know that well, actually, all the platforms that we put this on, you can see it. But right behind your head, it says petealexander.com, which I'm assuming is the best way to reach you. How else
Correct.
might somebody find you if they wanted to learn more about de-stressing their world or just lightening their day?
Sure. Go ahead and go to my LinkedIn is probably where I'm most active on social media. And the book's on Amazon. So there's that. And it's in 3 different versions, print version, Kindle, as well as audio. So
Did you record your own audiobook?
I did. I did. So,
Too. I had so much fun doing it too. I just recently I wrote my book in 2020. It's called Learning
Mhm,
Can Stick, but I just recorded it on Audible in September. And what
mhm.
was so fun about it was going back and hearing my own words out loud with my own voice and going, "Oh, that was actually kind of clever." Or, "Oh, why did I say it like that?" Right? The whole I felt all the feels for sure.
And let me ask you, did you also think, boy, do I really sound like that? Because isn't it
Yes.
funny how we hear when we're talking, we hear our voice one way, but then when you hear it on a recording, it's a different
Oh,
tone.
for sure.
That's
I've
just
learned that this year with the podcast too.
Mhm.
Definitely going, oh, I say that a lot, or oh gosh, that's the inflection I do in that space. But I'm also learning to give myself some grace in that space
Absolutely.
because this is the way I was made. So if you
Right.
don't like it, you don't have to listen. That's the number one thing that I think I'm taking away from 2024 is that I am a gift, just like you are a
Mhm.
gift. But everybody
Absolutely.
doesn't need the exact same gift. And so it's
Right.
okay if I am not somebody's particular gift that they need because I am the gift that somebody else needs. And the same is true for you, Professor Pete, is
Right.
that you are a gift. It is so clear to me that you are authentically who you are, no matter when somebody might be talking to you. And so I know you are a gift to those who are in the same space, or maybe you're preventing people from getting into the space of being so stressed that they end up in the hospital. So I just again want to say thank you. Thank you for spending time with us today, but also thank you for not choosing to keep all of this wonderful information to yourself, but instead put it out there. That's pretty awesome.
Well, thank you so much for your kind words, Christy. It's been a pleasure talking to you. And one other thing I'll leave the audience with, as you were talking about it, where you don't have to listen. So one thing that I have on my computer as a monitor is a reminder to myself that I'm not going to be liked by everyone because I'm not pizza. So
Yes.
think about that. Whenever I've got somebody who just says, "Nah, this doesn't work for me," it's like, "Okay, I'm not pizza."
You know what? It's funny. I have heard twice in the last week and I don't remember why I was having this conversation with more than one person. If you could only eat one food for the rest of your life, what it would be. And both of their answers was pizza because you can turn it into anything. It could be a breakfast pizza, it could be a dessert pizza, it could be a
Right.
savory, salty, sweet, whatever you
Yep.
want to make it.
Yeah,
Well, wait,
exactly.
I do have some rapid fire questions for you though before you go because I can't
Fire
not
away.
ask them. I'd be very sad if I didn't know the answers. Okay, so are you
Okay.
ready?
Yep. Fire
Okay.
away.
Deep breath. Here we go. What's your definition of fun?
Ooh, I would say climbing up to a mountain peak that's got a crystal clear view.
Mm. Well, and you help other people do that too. I love it.
Yep.
Okay. How do you know that you are showing up as your authentic self?
I can tell because I'm doing a lot of laughter and I just feel calm. I'm not tense, worried about anything.
Mm,
So that's how I can tell.
it's a good answer. How do you channel your best self on your worst days?
Because one of the techniques that I use is gratitude. And so when I'm having a bad day, I still look for things about what's going on that I can be grateful for, and I can always find something. Even if you cannot stand your job, you could think of some positives. Like, for example, oh, it gives you a paycheck, right?
Yeah.
Or maybe you get benefits, or maybe you have a friend there, or whatever it happens to be. So that I try and focus on gratitude, and that helps me on a bad day.
Oh, I love it. Okay, last question. And we talked about this at the beginning. I have a feeling you'll still go in the same direction, but people by nature will latch on to one thing during a 30-minute podcast that they take with them. What's
Mhm.
the one nugget of wisdom that you really want the listeners to walk away with today?
Don't trade your health for your career because that's a very bad trade.
Oh, and you couldn't possibly say that better. Well, Professor Pete, thank you for your time, for your energy. And today was genuinely delightful. And so, listeners, it is a brand new year tomorrow. And I am unbelievably hopeful that you are taking with you the lessons that you just learned from this particular podcast about the fact that you can't trade work for your life. Like it's not worth it. The stress is not worth it. Instead, trade wisely, be smart.
Mhm.
And as always, I want to leave you remembering that you need to find a way today to turn fun into action.